The tango had reached a fevered pitch, the music now a tense, pulsing rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat of every person in the room. Isabel moved with a grace that was almost supernatural, her body fluid, yet controlled, every step purposeful and deliberate. The crowd, initially gathered for spectacle and amusement, had fallen silent, captivated by the intensity radiating from the pair at the center. Adrian Steele, the millionaire who had never been challenged like this before, felt a strange mixture of awe and unease. He followed her lead, his usual arrogance dissolving under the weight of her skill and presence. Every step, every pivot, every daring lift was a statement, a reminder of her past, her resilience, and her unyielding spirit. As they spun across the marble floor, Adrian finally dared to ask, his voice low and tense, "Who taught you to move like this?" Isabel's eyes flickered, a shadow crossing her face, and for a moment the fire in her gaze softened into memory. "My husband," she whispered, the words barely audible over the final notes of the violin. The crowd leaned in involuntarily, sensing a story beneath the performance, though none could have anticipated its depth. Murmurs ran like whispers through the room, uncertain, shocked, and reverent. Her husband had been a champion dancer, a man who had dreamed alongside her, who had shared her ambition and her heartbreak. And then tragedy had struck. A sudden accident that had stolen him from her life, leaving her to bury her passion alongside her grief. The revelation was electric. Adrian's own mind faltered, memories long buried surfacing like unwelcome ghosts. He remembered the night years ago when Isabel had vanished from the public eye after the accident. He had heard of the tragedy but had dismissed it as a story, a sad footnote in his world of profit and parties. Now, seeing her dance with the precision and fire of someone who had survived unimaginable loss, he felt a pang of guilt and recognition. The woman before him was not just a dancer. She was a force of nature, a living testament to love, grief, and unbroken spirit. The crowd, sensing the depth of what was unfolding, moved closer, their previous laughter replaced by silent fascination. Isabel's movement seemed to speak directly to Adrian, every step a reminder of the challenge he had thrown, every pivot a declaration of her resilience. She led him through daring turns and near impossible spins, her energy commanding his full attention. With each movement, the ballroom seemed to bend to her will, the music responding to her intensity, the spectators transfixed. And then came the crescendo, a moment where time itself seemed suspended. Isabel spun away from Adrian, her gaze meeting his across the distance, and for a heartbeat the entire room held its breath. The power of her story, unspoken yet undeniable, washed over him. He realized that the dance had never been about mockery or humiliation. It had been about revelation, about showing the world, and him in particular, the strength that had been forged in the fire of loss. In that instant, Adrian Steele understood that he was not facing just a dancer, but a woman who had risen from the ashes of her past, commanding respect, awe, and something far more profound than any fleeting amusement. The pace of the tango intensified, the orchestra now fully immersed in the drama that had overtaken the ballroom. Isabel moved with a confidence that seemed to defy gravity, her body a whip of controlled energy and elegance. Every step was precise, yet infused with raw emotion, each pivot, each sway, each flick of her wrist a challenge and a declaration. Adrian Steele, who had spent his life accustomed to commanding every room he entered, felt a rare vulnerability as he followed her lead. He had danced before, often for amusement or charm, but never like this. Never with the intensity, the purpose, and the fire that now emanated from her. He realized that he was no longer the master of the floor. He was a partner in her narrative, an actor in the story she had chosen to tell, and with every step he felt himself being stripped of arrogance and pride. The spectators were spellbound. The room, which had once buzzed with laughter and chatter, now held only the sound of the orchestra and the soft scuff of shoes against polished marble. People leaned forward, some with their hands clasped over their mouths, others with eyes wide in awe, as if witnessing a transformation that transcended dance. Every movement Isabel made seemed to speak directly to the hearts of those watching. A story of loss, defiance, strength, and reclamation. She was not performing for applause. She was reclaiming her presence, her dignity, and her power in a room that had dismissed her too quickly. Adrian, struggling to keep up, felt the tide of control shifting with each step. She spun him sharply, pulling him off balance just enough to remind him that he was not the one leading. He stumbled for a heartbeat, catching himself, and in that moment, a mix of humility and awe filled him. He had underestimated her, not just as a dancer, but as a person who had survived grief, who had risen from tragedy with a strength that no wealth, no charm, no power could diminish. Every gasp from the crowd seemed to fuel her further, and yet, she danced not for them but for herself, and for the memory of the love she had lost. The tempo quickened, the music thrumming with electricity. Isabel led Adrian through daring turns and complex steps that would have challenged even the most experienced dancers. Her eyes locked onto his, unwavering, compelling him to match her intensity, to surrender to her rhythm, to become part of the story she was telling with her body. He found himself responding instinctively, following her lead with a mixture of admiration and fear, realizing that for the first time in his life, he was dancing not for control or charm, but simply to keep pace with a force far greater than himself. And then came the climax, the moment when Isabel spun away, creating a space between them that radiated power and grace. She paused, her chest rising and falling with controlled intensity, her gaze meeting his with an almost tangible command. The orchestra held the final note, a suspended chord that seemed to hang in the air like lightning waiting to strike. The ballroom was utterly silent, the collective breath of the crowd held captive by the spectacle. Every spectator sensed the truth that had unfolded. This was no longer a mere dance. It was a reckoning, a display of resilience, and a transformation that left even Adrian Steele humbled. In that suspended moment, he understood the gravity of her presence, the undeniable force of her spirit, and the undeniable reality that the evening had changed forever, not for him, but because of her. The grand ballroom sparkled like a jewel under the weight of 1,000 golden chandeliers, each crystal prism catching the light and scattering it across the polished marble floor. Music swelled from the orchestra pit, a lively, yet elegant symphony that mingled with the murmur of conversation and the clinking of champagne glasses. Men in perfectly tailored tuxedos and women in gowns of silk and satin moved gracefully across the dance floor, their laughter and chatter forming a symphony of opulence. Amid this glittering display, Adrian Steele, the millionaire who seemed to command the attention of every soul in the room, stood at the center, a glass of champagne raised with a mocking gleam in his eyes. His jaw was sharp, his hair perfectly combed, his smile charming but laced with cruelty. Across the room, near a corner where the warm glow of candlelight softened the edges of the space, stood Isabel Hart. Her dress was simple, a plain black, fabric that clung to her figure modestly, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, her hands folded lightly before her. She was the event planner, the invisible backbone of this lavish evening, accustomed to fading into the background, while others basked in the spotlight. Yet tonight her presence drew attention in a way she had not anticipated. Adrian's gaze landed on her, a predator spotting something unfamiliar, something worth teasing. He raised his voice, ensuring that everyone within earshot could hear, and with a smile that did not reach his eyes, he said, "If you dance the tango, I'll marry you." The words, intended as mockery, echoed across the ballroom. A ripple of laughter followed, first polite, then increasingly cruel, as the crowd sensed the opportunity for spectacle at Isabel's expense. She felt a flush creep across her cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and anger tightening her chest. Her first instinct was to retreat, to shrink behind the nearest decorative pillar and disappear into the shadows, invisible once more. But as she met Adrian's eyes, something stirred inside her, a quiet, defiant spark that refused to bow to ridicule. The laughter, which had seemed so overwhelming, began to fade against the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. She drew in a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room, and then she made her choice. "Play the music," she said, her voice soft yet clear, carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. A collective murmur ran through the crowd, shock, curiosity, disbelief, as the orchestra, momentarily halted by the sudden command, prepared to respond. The mocking smile on Adrian's face faltered for the first time. He had expected compliance, submission, maybe even tears. Instead, he saw something he hadn't anticipated. Courage. Something dangerous. Something magnetic. And as the first notes of the tango began to rise, curling through the air like smoke, the entire ballroom seemed to shift, the laughter dying on lips that had anticipated another easy spectacle. Isabel stepped forward, her hands relaxed at her sides, her eyes steady, her movements small but deliberate. The dance, the challenge, the humiliation, everything had begun, and yet no one, not even Adrian Steele, could have guessed the storm that was about to unfold. ChatGPT said. The first sharp notes of the tango cut through the heavy silence that had fallen over the ballroom, a slow, deliberate rhythm that seemed to pulse with defiance. Isabel stepped onto the polished floor, her heels clicking softly against the marble, each step a quiet assertion of presence and purpose. The crowd, previously confident in their amusement, instinctively drew back, forming a semicircle around the two figures at the center. Adrian Steele, still wearing the remnants of his smirk, extended a hand toward her, expecting her to falter, to hesitate, to succumb to the weight of embarrassment he had so carefully orchestrated. Instead, she met his gaze steadily, her brown eyes dark with focus, and took his hand with a poise that made the billionaire pause. The music swelled, a low, seductive chord that seemed to wrap around them like a living thing, and the dance began. From the first step, it was clear that this was no ordinary performance. Isabel's movements were precise yet fluid, each twist of her wrist, each subtle turn of her body, telling a story of discipline, loss, and raw emotion. Adrian, accustomed to commanding every room he entered, found himself caught in her orbit, forced to follow where she led, to match the intensity she radiated. His usual arrogance wavered with every step, his balance challenged not just by her skill, but by the undeniable force of presence she carried. The ballroom, filled with onlookers who had anticipated ridicule, grew still. Conversations ceased mid-sentence. Glasses were forgotten in hands. The music alone held the room captive. Isabel spun him expertly, her dress flowing in perfect rhythm with her movement, and with each turn the distance between them seemed to collapse. The mockery in Adrian's eyes faltered, replaced by a mixture of astonishment and something unfamiliar. Respect, tinged with fear. The energy she exuded was both electric and magnetic. She did not merely dance, she commanded, she challenged, she transformed the space around them. The orchestra responded instinctively, the musicians feeding off the tension and the passion, radiating from the center of the floor, raising the tempo, accentuating the drama. Whispers started circulating through the crowd. "Who taught her?" one woman murmured. "Is she professional?" another whispered, the awe in her voice palpable. No one had ever seen her in this light, and the revelation that a quiet, reserved event planner could dominate a billionaire in such a display shocked them. But Isabel paid them no mind. Her focus was singular, absolute. Every glance, every lean, every precise step was deliberate. A story unfolding in motion, silent rebuke to the mocking challenge Adrian had issued. As the dance progressed, a strange shift occurred. Adrian, usually untouchable in his confidence, began to sweat, his usual composure cracking under the weight of her presence. He tried to lead, tried to assert control, but the rhythm was hers. The fire hers, the floor hers. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar, vulnerability. The crowd leaned forward, collective breaths held, sensing that they were witnessing not just a dance, but a transformation. A quiet, unstoppable assertion of strength from someone who had been dismissed, underestimated, and mocked. Isabel's tango was no longer a performance, it was a revelation, and with every step she made it clear. This was her world now, and Adrian Steele was merely following. The final note of the orchestra lingered in the air, a delicate echo that seemed almost reluctant to fade, as if even the music recognized the gravity of what had just transpired. Isabel stood a few steps away from Adrian, chest rising and falling, the heat of exertion painting her cheeks, her gaze steady and unyielding. The ballroom remained frozen in time, every guest motionless, holding their breath as though afraid to disturb the fragile electric silence that had replaced laughter and mockery. No one clapped. No one whispered. Even the chandelier's light seemed to dim slightly, as if acknowledging that the spectacle had transcended mere performance. Isabel's dance had done more than silence the room. It had stripped away pretense, pride, and cruelty, leaving only raw truth in its wake. Adrian Steele, usually untouchable in his confidence, felt a strange emptiness gnaw at him. He stood rigid, chest tight, a flush creeping across his usually pale, composed face. The arrogance that had carried him through decades of boardrooms, galas, and social conquests now seemed brittle and hollow. He had thought this would be a game, a playful display of wealth and power over someone who was supposed to be invisible. He had been wrong. Isabel's tango had exposed the very core of him: vulnerability, shame, admiration, and a begrudging respect that he could neither deny nor articulate. He stepped toward her, each footfall hesitant, uncertain, as if crossing an invisible barrier that she alone had set. "Wait," he said finally, his voice unsteady, betraying a crack in the armor he had spent his life building. I wasn't mocking you. I was afraid of you." The words hung between them, awkward, raw, and sincere. Isabel paused, her eyes scanning his face, reading the truth he had finally admitted. She had expected apologies, perhaps explanations, or even arrogance cloaked in charm. But what she received instead was honesty, stripped of pretense. The silence in the room deepened, punctuated only by the soft murmur of a few astonished onlookers who dared to breathe. She did not move toward him, nor did she reach out. Her power, earned through grief, resilience, and unshakable resolve, allowed her the luxury of choice. "Keep your fear," she said softly, her voice a blend of strength and serenity. "It suits you more than arrogance." There was no bitterness, no invitation for reconciliation, only the quiet assertion of self-respect and finality. And then, without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, each step resonant and deliberate, leaving a trail of awe and stunned silence in her wake. As she disappeared into the cool night beyond the grand doors, the ballroom remained motionless. The wealthy, the powerful, the elite, all had been silenced by the audacity of a woman who refused to be diminished. Weeks later, the headlines would immortalize the night. Millionaire funds dance scholarship in memory of widow who defied him. The story spread like wildfire, not for scandal or spectacle, but for courage and grace. And Adrian Steele, once the mocker and cynic, remained forever changed. The night had not just shut everyone up, it had reshaped the very understanding of strength, humility, and the quiet power of a woman who dared to reclaim her story.